Welcome to the Empowered Spirit Show. This is your host, Terry Ann Hyman. I'll explore the connection to the human spirit in a way that helps to navigate your life, including crisis. I am passionate about helping you to open up to your intuition and the metaphysical world of spirit to find your confidence in your own inner guidance. Take a pause, be inspired, learn ways to show up focused, centered, and more dynamic in your everyday life.
Welcome back to the Empowered Spirit Show. Thank you so much for tuning in and joining me today. This episode is being sponsored by Ritual and Shelter. Are you looking for a magical place to shop and hold space? Check out Ritual and Shelter online or in Homewood, Alabama. Browse through their bookshelves covering topics such as energy healing, crystal healing, Reiki, chakras, auras, the Akashic Records, shadow work, astrology, and earth-based healing. You can also find herbal teas and tinctures alongside their crystals and oils to help establish a mindful mindset and fluid ambience before meditation, ritual work, and reflection. Ritual and Shelter is dedicated to providing one-on-one, in-depth conversations with customers to help them find the most efficient healing methods and resources that match their unique interest and energy. They offer tarot sessions, Reiki, sound bowl, and crystal healing, and now they are offering witch consultations. Visit ritualshelter.com to book an appointment and bring peace back to the body, mind, and spirit. You can also find them on Instagram at Ritual Shelter Shop, as well as Pinterest at Ritual Plus Shelter. As this podcast goes to air, we've just moved through the new moon energies, opening up also to the Chinese New Year, the year of the wood snake. Snake energy is about transformation. It's about shedding a skin, opening up, growth, even abundance. Where can you shed that skin as we open up to this new moon energy and this new year? Where can you let go of the old patterns and feel maybe even that rawness that can help you to grow? As we move through this time, we recognize that we are in a bit of a transition. I know most of us don't like change, but we all go through it. We all go through transitions. So now is the time to dig in deep. We're in winter. Go within the soul. Ask these questions. Expand the way in which you view your life so that you can find ways to get out of those old patterns and behaviors and open up more to your dreams and your visions. That is what winter is all about, dreaming and visioning new possibilities into your life. When you do go within, you can find the messages, the understanding of what you're here for, and a deeper purpose to your life. When you start going within, you can tune in to those messages that will help you with your growth. It can be challenging, and maybe you might think, how does she do that? What is she talking about? How do you go within? I can help you with that. I can teach you the tools and techniques to bring you into that place within you, that quietness, so that you can learn about your soul's journey. It is so important to have these tools, meditation, tapping, reading your Akashic Records, all of these things we can learn to do for ourselves. We need guidance. We need understanding. We need a little push in that direction for confirmation. That's how we bring that confidence forward to grow. And so I offer complimentary spiritual upgrade breakthrough call with me to talk about what's getting in your way, what's blocking you from knowing more about your path. Schedule a call with me and we can figure out what that is and see what that next step forward is for you. I'll put the link in the show notes. So in today's episode, I had the great opportunity to interview Gregory Shushan, whose book, Near-Death Experience in Ancient Civilizations, it's all about the origins of the world's afterlife beliefs. Quite fascinating. We talked about near-death experiences. We talked about the afterlife. We talked about what happened, common misbeliefs, and we talked about how this can help you in your present day life, uncovering and understanding more about your own soul's journey. Before we begin, let's take a moment to pause and center and set an intention for this new moon energy. So wherever you are, if you can, close your eyes. Taking a nice deep inhale, breathing up the body. And as you exhale, breathing all the way down. Calling in the fire, the air, the earth, the water. Opening up to the sacred elements. Inhale, breathing up the body. Exhale all the way back down. Dropping right into the heart, right into the deepest part of your heart. Feeling that connection, your spirit and the greater spirit. Know that you are loved, guided, protected. Feeling all this energy coming in around us as we go to set this energy. Calling in the Reiki masters, the teachers that have come before us. Calling in the angels to open the heart with joy and love. Calling in the crystal beings for amusement and magnification. Calling in your higher self right above the crown to receive these messages. Taking another deep inhale and exhale, dropping right into the heart. Taking a moment and noticing where you are on this great wheel of life. Where I am, we find ourselves in the season of winter and the direction of the north. We do our visions and our dreaming. We talk to our ancestors for guidance and messages. And so we call in these directions to the north, the east, the south, and the west, above us, below us, right into the very center. Taking a moment and setting an intention, your path, your light. See and hear and feel and know this intention. And as you take that next deep breath, exhaling right through the heart, setting out that energy all through your aura. Taking another deep inhale and exhale, feeling the heart opened, feeling that third eye illuminating. And as you're ready, blinking the eyes back open, coming back. My guest today, Gregory Shushan, PhD, and a leading authority on near-death experiences and afterlife beliefs across cultures and throughout history. He is an award-winning author affiliated with Birmingham Newman University, University of Winchester, Marian University, and the Parapsychology Foundation. A former researcher at the University of Oxford and University of Wales, he lives in San Francisco. So let us welcome Gregory to the show. Welcome, Gregory.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me on.
Yes, and what a fascinating subject that you have with your new book. It really is. Near-death experience and ancient civilization. Wow, so much to talk about, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I'd like to ask, what led you to this journey and led you to writing this book now?
It's been a long journey, actually. So I was, interested in near-death experiences from a pretty young age, as soon as I heard about them, because who wouldn't be? The idea that somebody dies, like is clinically dead and has this glimpse of another world and leaves their body and sometimes even sees their body and meets their deceased relatives and all this kind of stuff. And that it happens to various people who are not connected. It's not like a story that people tell. It's actually an experience. So that, kind of fired my imagination, but I didn't pursue it in any kind of professional sort of way. I had a pretty, diverging career path, basically. But the way it kind of came about was I was studying Egyptian archaeology in London at the Institute of Archaeology, University College London, and I was reading the ancient Egyptian texts about the afterlife. So everyone knows the Book of the Dead, but I was looking at the precursors to the Book of the Dead, which were the pyramid texts, which were engraved hieroglyphs engraved in the pyramids, like they were ritual texts for facilitating the burial of the king. And they gave instructions on what this happens to the soul and how the soul is supposed to negotiate the different stages of the afterlife realm. And then it's a similar thing on the coffin text, but they're painted inside coffins. So I was reading these texts and I suddenly thought there was this familiarity to them. Once you strip away the very specific Egyptian cultural elements, like the sun gods specifically, and the types of beings and deities that weigh the soul and whatever else, I felt like I'm still left with leaving the body, traveling through darkness, coming out in a world of light, a being of light in the form of the sun god, encountering the corpse because the god of death, Osiris, is said to be this one and the same as the person who's just died, and they encounter the corpse of Osiris in the other world. So they saw that as like an out of body experience and seeing one's own body, and a review of the person's life, their deeds on Earth, meeting deceased relatives, all this stuff. And I just suddenly started thinking, why is this so similar to near-death experience? Could it be possible that these ancient Egyptian priests and scribes were basing their afterlife beliefs on NDEs?
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah.
so that fired my imagination. And then I started thinking, okay, if that's similar in Egypt and near-death experience, is it similar and in different afterlife beliefs around the world from other unconnected civilizations? And so that's how this book came out. I wanted to compare the Egyptian afterlife beliefs and the afterlife beliefs from India before Buddhism, China before Buddhism, India before Hinduism, Mesopotamia, so the ancient Sumerian and Old Babylonian religions, and then Aztec and Maya on the other side of the world, and just look at their afterlife beliefs all in light of near-death experiences.
Yeah. And then you've written other books because you also have about Native American, the
Right.
culture there too, right? The
Yeah.
beliefs there too. So this is
Yeah,
not
I've
your
done
first
a
book,
right.
not your first rodeo, so to speak, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It is fascinating. And when you were talking, I was just like imagining the pyramids and thinking about that. And I remember when I first started studying color therapy, light therapy, and it did take us back to that time period too, when that technology, the whole idea of sitting and sunbathing and all came forward. So there is something to be said about these ancient civilizations and the wisdom that they bring forward. And then I've traveled to places, sacred sites, and then just having that whole energy of sacred energies and sites and things that have been done before us came forward. So it makes sense to me that you could learn so much more about these cultures and about the civilizations. And then, as you've put together in your book, the similarities and how they all parallel in together. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And there were, different kinds of spiritual practices, shamanic type practices, ritual, mystery, cult type experiences in ancient Greece, which also seemed to kind of mimic near-death experiences, or rather like replicate them to get the participants to kind of experience what an NDE would be like, but without having to die. And the idea is like they get the same transformational type of experience, positive transformations that somebody who has an NDE does, but in a safe way. And it's the same with Native American ghost dance and other kinds of Native American traditions, which, by the way, was based on the near-death experiences of their founders, which not a lot of people really recognize.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. The ghost dance. I remember studying that way back when for sure. Yeah. And then I just think it's also fascinating. I mean, we've seen, documentaries and TVs in the operating room and what happens. And, I did a show about comas not too long ago about what they found out about even comas and taking us into that whole realm of like that whole other reality that we can tap into. And it is so fascinating. And I think for me, it's like just because we can't see it, hello, everybody, there's still things going on, and especially with the evolution of our soul. And so, in my everyday world, in my life, I do work with the soul and I do help people to transition and I actually help prepare bodies for death. So, it is a fascinating time when we can start to like really sense all that energy around us. And then for you to study it and now bring these cultures forward, were you surprised at what you found? Were you surprised at the similarities?
I was, yeah. And I also kind of operated on the assumption that I wasn't going to find near-death experiences in these societies, like actual ones, as opposed to just descriptions of the afterlife that were similar to NDs, because I thought if they were there, other people would have found them and they'd be discussed in near-death studies. There's a whole field of near-death studies at International Association for Near-Death Studies and their journal and their conferences. I thought, obviously somebody would have found them before then, but that wasn't the case. I ended up finding actual ancient examples of near-death experiences all around the world. Well, not in Egypt, surprisingly enough, but I don't think that's because they weren't having them. I think it's because they didn't use writing to talk about things like that. It was a
Mm-hmm.
priestly thing and it was like a government bureaucracy thing. Like ordinary people weren't literate and they didn't just kind of like write about their experiences. But yeah, so I ended up finding actual accounts of near-death experiences in almost all of these different civilizations, as well as you mentioned when I did the work on Native Americans, that was comparing Native American indigenous societies in the Pacific and in Africa. And this is all kind of, small scale, what used to be called tribal cultures. And they all had near-death experiences, less so in Africa. And, there's different reasons for the differences across cultures. But, I found something like 70 just in Native American examples alone, along with just, people actually saying, the reason we know about the afterlife is because so and so went there and came back and told us what it was like. So it's basically proof of this idea that people are getting their afterlife beliefs from these kinds of experiences and integrating them into their religious beliefs.
Which is a lot where shamanism comes from. I mean, modern day, especially, because then we go back and we study and we learn and we bring some of these teachings forwards, and the journey of the soul is where some of this comes forward. But it's got to originate somewhere,
Right,
right? Yeah.
right. And I think that in a lot of cases, shamanism was also a kind of attempt to bring about a near-death type experience. Either people heard about them or they wanted to, again, replicate that experience. Or in other cases, if somebody is dying and in danger of dying permanently, the shaman will send their soul to the other world to bring that sick person back, to bring them back to their soul, to their body, to try to heal them. So it's basically the shaman goes after the near-death experiencer as a healing journey, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Like for depression, especially too, right?
That too,
Yeah.
yeah.
And even soul retrieval. I've been through those myself in my training and education. It's just like retrieving that soul part
Hmm.
of you. And so it does simulate that. And I think that they teach us too, like if you're afraid of death, let's go into it, right?
Yeah.
Let's have that experience. But there is so much to be learned from for the soul and for the journey that we all take. And I know some of the work I do, and we can retrieve some of that soul energy or past life. I feel like it enriches where we are and brings that wisdom forward. What did you find from this? What did you find people's experiences on these near deaths? What were they showing you?
I would say that throughout history and across cultures, almost always the near-death experience results in some kind of positive transformation. So either the person, and we have to also remember that these are often presented in a way that's intended to send a message to either in a religious way, like to prove that their religion is true, or a social control way to kind of, say that this person had this revelation and therefore you have to kind of participate in society or change your behavior in a certain way. So they have agendas, they have goals, but even that aside, it's almost always a kind of positive message afterwards. So it's either that they have healing powers when they come back, they have knowledge about where to find a certain sacred herb or medicine that will help heal somebody, something about healing the community, maintaining their culture in the face of, a colonial threat from Europeans in Native America, that sort of thing. The maintenance of their own culture and standing up against the invaders. Sometimes just the opposite. Sometimes the message was we have to cooperate with the invaders because otherwise we're going to lose our culture. So, but it's always
Mm,
this kind of a positive message or a positive transformation.
interesting. Yeah. I know for me, I had a near death like, and from talking to people and researching it a little bit more, I didn't even realize that it was that because I knew I didn't die, but I had an outer body. I was in a car crash and I had an outer
Mhm.
body experience. And the message, that's what just related that to me, is like the message that came back was huge. It's like you still have work to do, quit
Mhm.
playing small, like open up your message and all. But then COVID hit and the world shut down.
Mhm.
And that set my soul, I would say fragmented. That set my soul like, what happened? Like, I couldn't do my work. I couldn't get this message out there. And it took me several years to really understand what had happened. Huge searches, huge,
Mhm.
working with shamans and teachers and like, what is wrong with me? What is going on with me? It took me a while before I actually kind of landed back in my body. And that was pretty
Mhm.
amazing. Did you uncover any kind of situations like that? I know you talk about out of body experiences in the book.
Yeah, lots of out-of-body experiences, but as far as the way society responds to it, I would say in the majority of the ancient cultures and the indigenous cultures, there's more of an acceptance than what you encountered. In fact, a lot of people, say in Australia, I was looking in Australian afterlife beliefs and shamanic experiences, and I was digging and digging, looking for actual near-death experience accounts, and I couldn't find any. And that made me search even harder because I'm finding them everywhere else in the world. And then I realized that they're presenting their near-death experiences as shamanic experiences. And the near-death context, the illness or the accident or whatever, wasn't really important to them. It was just the journey that was important. And it was that journey that actually made the person a shaman. The NDE gave them the shamanic status.
Hmm.
So that's a big difference to the way a lot of NDEers are treated in contemporary society, where you're seen to be crazy or fragmented or whatever. There's still a kind of stigma surrounding them, where in the past societies, I don't think that was so much the case.
How interesting, right? That it shifted back that way. Yeah. It was pretty profound for me, and it took me a while, and I really feel like I've just caught up with that and really felt like I didn't even know who to ask, right? That kind of
Mhm.
questions. Like, I'm making this up because, again, I knew I didn't die, but I totally left my body and I totally had a big message that I received, but I kind of, kept it quiet. And I think
Mhm.
lots of times, even with death, we keep it quiet. We don't talk about it. It is now becoming more and more that people are talking about death and talking about even preparations for death, that kind of thing.
Right.
But I think that near death experience is very fascinating. I know I first came across the whole concept with Dr. Moody.
Uh-huh.
He's kind of local to my area, and I would listen to him late at night on the radio and what he had to say. And I too found it very fascinating that we have these opportunities. And now for you to tie in all the various different cultures and all, there is a commonality.
There is. And, even Moody, 1970, this is now the 50th anniversary of the formal introduction of near-death experiences in the West. So actually, I should make that point. When I talk about near-death experience in past societies in ancient world, we have to remember there was no term for them back then. There's no like academic term. So you can't like go to the library and look in a book that was published in 1910, near-death experience. It's not there. So you have to look up
Fascinating.
afterlife beliefs and read all about the afterlife beliefs, and maybe embedded in that you'll find a description of what we would today consider an NDE. But anyway, Moody, even in his book, he acknowledged a couple of cross-cultural examples, and he mentioned the myth of from Plato, which is, the probably earliest Western example of an NDE. There are earlier ones in different cultures. So yeah, he was aware of that. But for some reason, I guess just because the question of like, are these experiences real? Do near-death experiences really represent an afterlife experience? That became such like the dominating question of near-death studies, that the cross-cultural and historical stuff wasn't really explored for years, for really a long time. There were a couple of sociologists, James McLennan and Alan Kelly here, kind of did a little bit of work in it. But it was really a while before that field kind of spread out I think I wrote the first actual full-length book on cross-cultural and historical NDEs. So yeah, and I think it's important for near-death studies, because all the theorizing about NDEs, whether they're saying, oh, it's just all in the brain, it's the dying brain, or whether they're saying it's really a metaphysical experience, it's always based on like the Western stereotype model of near-death experience. It's not taking the diversity into account because, as you said, they're similar across cultures, but there are also differences.
Yeah, so I'm an interfaith minister of spiritual counseling, and in New York, I studied in our ministry all religions. And I think some of what you're saying too is blocked because of the boundaries that religion plays on us. But if we look through that higher ability to look at spiritual energy, that's where so much stuff opens up,
Mm,
right? I don't think our soul cares what religion we're in, right? Like that soul journey that we're on, right? And so
right.
then we're able to open up and expand it more. But sometimes the boundaries that we as humans put on ourselves, and it kind of locks it down in being one way or the other. But I think this whole expression of cross culture and understanding, it shows us that our soul just travels,
Mhm.
right? One lifetime to another.
Yeah, and also that we remain individuals in the other world. And I should just say too that as a scholar, as a historian of religions, I try not to make any, I don't know. I don't have an opinion or a decision one way or another on the metaphysical reality. I just really kind of try to keep my head down and do the work. So if I say, in
Unlike
the
me, huh?
afterlife, yeah, yeah. So if I say in the afterlife, blah, 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 I'm not claiming to know what happens in the afterlife, or even if there is one. I'm just basically talking from the perspective of descriptions of near-death experience, people who believe that they've been there and claim to have been there. So, but yeah, so just I'll just give one example of the differences across cultures that I think is important and is ignored by people on both sides of the debate. So I'll give a couple of examples because they're interesting. One of them is in Western contemporary near-death experiences, we have this notion of traveling through a dark tunnel and coming out into a realm of light. Cross-culturally, there isn't really a tunnel. It's there are different means of traveling from here to the other world. So in a lot of Pacific cultures in Hawaii and other Polynesian societies, they talk about walking along a path, and they will even say, I could see the footprints in the sand of the people who had been there before me. And in some cases, they'll say, I saw somebody coming back the opposite direction. That's somebody who was having a near-death experience and was on their way back to their body. So it's a similar idea. It's traveling from this realm to another, but it's symbolized by their consciousness in this way that's going to be familiar to them and relevant to, Polynesian physical experience in the world. Another one is the life review, where the kind of stereotypical idea is we have this panoramic life review where all of our memories kind of coalesce at once. We experience everything that we've ever experienced, and we also experience the emotions of all the other people that were involved in those experiences. So if we hurt somebody, we're going to feel what they were like when they were hurt. That's pretty much totally absent across cultures and in different cultures. What they do have is some kind of evaluation of their previous life. There's a great example from a Native American NDE where the guy who was having the NDE saw a photograph on the wall, a picture of him, and somehow embodied in that photograph were all of his life's deeds. But it wasn't like a
Mm.
panoramic, empathetic life review. So the reason this is important is because I think near-death scholars, near-death studies researchers on the science side, as well as the skeptics, really need to engage with these differences, because why are they different? Does that mean it's more likely that these are genuine experiences, or more likely that, they're all in the brain or whatever? And for the most part, they just ignore that whole question, which is a little
Mm. Very
frustrating.
interesting, because I will say that was one of the things that kept me from understanding, because people would say that to me. Well, did you see a light? Did you see a tunnel?
Right.
Did you have a review? And I couldn't say I did any of those, but I know I left my body. I know
Right.
I examined the entire scene, including the inside of the other person's car, and then
Right.
came back into my car, seatbelt still on,
Yeah.
and the message. So the message was very strong for me. And so I think that's what kept me in a little bit of a puzzle. Like, I don't know what happened, but I also know that I did fragment off a little bit.
Mm.
Now I can say that I do have that big message, and I do
Mhm.
carry that further to help me enhance the work that I do. But at the
Mhm.
time, like, oh my gosh. So I think that's really important what you just told me. It's like, okay, that I could kind of say, okay, I didn't have that, but I had this, and maybe everybody's is different, which is basically what I have now come to understand, that everybody does have different experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even Moody says that in his book in 1975. He says, there's this set of 15 different components that make up an NDE, but he didn't find one single example that had all of those 15. So
Hmm.
then, subsequently, people like Bruce Grayson and other near-death experience scholars came up with these scales. So if somebody has 5 or 6 out of this set of 15 or 21 or whatever it is, then we can consider that an NDE. And I understand the importance of that, because we want to be able to understand, what sub experiences make up an NDE. But for me, the important thing is whether you temporarily died, had experiences while your consciousness was still functioning outside the body, and then came back and talked about it. What happens in between, I think, is almost irrelevant in the sense of whether we call it an NDE or not. I would consider anything to be an NDE if you have memories in a time when you're temporarily dead or near dead.
Yeah, interesting. It is quite fascinating. And the whole idea of consciousness, does it reside in the brain? Not really, right? It's like an expanded state. And I know from the work I do with past lives that we can find that consciousness all around. What did you discover through this that related to past life energy?
With this work, I did run across some examples of reincarnation memories. What I was more interested in, although not in this book either, but the idea of intermission memories. The when people who claim to remember past lives, they also remember the death of their previous personality. And to me, what's so fascinating about that is that death experience is usually described in, well, I would say pretty much always described in similar terms as a near-death experience. So, for example, there's one from 19th century Japan, just to kind of pull one out of the hat, where a little boy dies and he remembers his soul going to the other world. He remembers seeing his funeral below him on his way to the other world. He meets this being in the other world who discusses his life with him and plans his rebirth with him. meets his deceased relatives. So it's basically an NDE, but instead of going back to his old body, he's going to be reborn in a new body.
Hmm.
So that's a really, to me, that's a kind of understudied dimension of reincarnation beliefs. There are quite a few, you probably know in University of Virginia, there's a whole department that looks at this kind of thing. There was a psychiatrist named Ian Stevenson who wrote quite a few books on children who remember past lives. Not so much regression, but spontaneous memories. And the focus is on investigating, whether they can find an actual identity to support what the children. So if somebody says, I look like this is my name, I lived in this village, then they'll go to that place and interview the locals and try to find his parents and all that. But the intermission memories, I think, are a little bit more difficult to study, except in the case of like comparing them to near-death experiences and other
Hmm.
types of shamanic experiences, maybe, because it's the same kind of realm and same principle of leaving the body behind, going to another realm, and then the soul in the other world figuring out what's going to come next.
Yeah, I tell you, right now with everything going on, I like to leave my body and travel, right? Like, get me out of this. But that's not the way I can do my work. I have to come back into the body for sure. But it
That's
is
for sure,
fascinating. I'm
yeah.
also a student of Dr. Brian Weiss. I mean, that was one of
All
my
right,
very first early on, just fascinated with his work, which is kind of what led me into doing some of the past life work that I do.
right,
Just fascinating. And the
yeah,
messages he would talk about and people having those memories and then going to, like you just said, checking them out.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Definitely. But to see it through all cultures, I feel like it opens the door for us to recognize, like, even with all religions, like, we can all be the same.
right. Yeah, and there's no reason we should all be the same once we no longer have bodies. And that's what the science people are saying, and that's what the religion people are saying. Like, so I keep running across in books about near death experiences statements like all NDEs are the same around the world. That suggests that there really is an afterlife. To me, that doesn't really make any sense. Why does the afterlife have to be the same for everybody? Why why since life on this planet isn't the same for anybody? I don't think it would be the same once we're freed of our bodies. We don't suddenly lose our memories and our culture and beliefs and everything just because we don't have a body.
Yeah, let me clarify that statement because
Sure.
I don't really necessarily mean that we're all the same in our circumstances, but we're all like, I am you, you are me. We all have a unity that connects us all, I should say,
Right.
like that, because it
Yeah.
doesn't make like one religion better than the other, or even one afterlife experience or near death better than the other, but that we can have this common thread that we are connected in many ways. I think that's really what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Right. And that ties in with things like people who have a near-death experience and see a being of light. One person is going to come back and say, I saw Jesus. And you say, well, describe him, and they'll describe a being of light. Another person will see Muhammad, another will see the Buddha
Yes.
or Krishna or whatever. So whether that is the same being of light and everyone's seeing it in a different way, or whether it's a different being of light for each person, we don't have any way of knowing. But it's an interesting example of like similarity and difference at the same time.
I agree with that. I do agree with that. I think that's where I was trying to express too, because we have so many divisions right now that keep us separated,
Yeah.
right? In our earth plane, in our today life, right? We do, but we don't need to have that. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you study or you study or you study or you believe, but we can all come in together with our different points of views and still be together. And I think that's kind of where I was going with that. And
Right.
then to uncover through all the different cultures and stuff that, yes, in all cultures we have this is
Mhm.
another way of expressing that.
Right. Yeah. And it's a lot of it is just about respecting diversity. And that's not just on this
My
planet,
point.
whether it comes to race or gender or sexuality or whatever, it's belief and it's, concepts of the afterlife or whatever it is. And again, I think that's once, if we do survive the death of our physical body and we're in another world, there's going to be diversity still. And which is great. I don't know, I've never understood why people don't celebrate diversity, why it's threatening to people. And I
I
think
hear
that's
you.
one of the messages that continually comes through in NDEs. And like you were saying, this sense of oneness and transcendence of of difference, but at the same time, you can still keep diversity and individuality.
I agree. And I hear what you're saying too, with like, yes, we all can have those individual experiences. And they can be different, and they don't all have to be exactly the same, but it is that oneness. And that's kind of where I was going with too. And that you have been able to uncover in all of these different cultures. And we have this ability of our soul to travel.
Hmm.
And I think it is fascinating. And I know in other lifetimes, I've had parallel lifetimes, I've had star people lifetimes, right? And I think that's like we can open up to that kind of expanded consciousness through these kind of studies and understanding of the soul's journey.
Hmm. I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what is your mission with all of this?
Wow, that's a great question. And it's one I think about. I've been doing this type of research for, 25 years or so, maybe a little more. And partly what keeps me going is looking at that diversity. There's always a new culture to explore. So, for example, right now I'm doing another book, a long research project on near-death experience in ancient Greece and Rome, classical antiquity. And that's more about looking at diversity within the culture. So I want to look at how people were skeptical about them, how people believed them in them, how they justified their belief in them, how they compared them with other ones, how they influenced literature and religion and all these other things. So partly it's just there's always a new culture or civilization to explore. But it's true, at the root of it, it's always this near-death experience, afterlife sort of belief. So I think part of it is really about the diversity and normalizing diversity for people who have these experiences and who might have been raised with some kind of religious dogma, regardless of what the religion is. People have very rigid ideas about what's going to be a valid experience, what's a valid belief. And I just feel like if people can maybe open their minds and their hearts a little bit to this diversity, they won't be so judgmental because there's no reason to be. I mean, I know like there are certain people who have NDEs and communities of people who have NDEs who judge each other because, oh, you didn't see the being of light, but I did. Therefore, or like, how dead were you? This kind of thing. It's just like let go of all that because, the ancient stuff I'm looking at, we don't even know how dead they were. Um, and there are
That's
plenty of
funny.
examples of NDEs where people weren't dead. Like there's a whole book from the 19th century about people who fall off cliffs, people who die from falls, and they have a full-blown NDE on the way down, and then they land and like they have a broken arm. So they were never fully unconscious. They never had like they weren't physically compromised or near death. So, and shamans, they're not near dead. So these experiences can happen in different situations. It just, the fact that they happen when people die is what makes them this, gives them this kind of significance. But I think, yeah, it's just another way of opening up to them and not having such rigid ideas, whether you're coming from science or metaphysics or New Age spirituality or whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that answers the question I was going to ask. Like, how does this affect us living in the present now when we read this and understand this better?
Yeah, yeah, it is, I think, about letting go of, there's this phrase toxic theology that people often will use to describe kind of damaging, limiting things that you learned growing up about sin, about being born with sin, about being fundamentally a bad person. And you have to like go through all this penance and difficulty and suffering in order to become a good person who, you'll be more accepted in your religion and have a better afterlife. No NDEs tell us that, basically.
Mhm.
So, if someone wants to believe in an afterlife, I would say, like the Native Americans were doing, look at people who have claimed to have been there, who have experiences of, having been temporarily dead. Their experiences, their descriptions, to me, are of more value than some kind of official dogma that was come up with, by a committee in a group of people 2,000 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's I guess it's just the short way of saying it is giving a prominence to experience, I think.
Right. And recognizing we're more than we think we are right here, right now.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
too, for sure.
Yeah. Opening up and expanding the consciousness all around us. It really is. I think sometimes we can get so very narrow limited. And then if we have those beliefs that we're brought, born into, like you were saying, and then we just look at one thing one way, I think that's where we create problems in the world for sure.
Right.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that it makes a more richer, beautiful culture, having all the different colors and ways of looking and beliefs. And let's all really open up and listen to each other. I think it's important. And I know right now in our country, we are struggling
Yeah.
with this. And so I hope that this work can help everybody to see.
Yeah. I hope
Yeah.
so. And sometimes I do feel like maybe I should have devoted my life to politics, or maybe I should have been like a, human rights lawyer or something like that. But I'm hoping that this kind of work will kind of, bridge the gap a little bit for at least a few people, because it is kind of irrelevant to a lot of the noise that's going on out in the world.
Yes and no, it is. But would you say that from where you started, like you have been able to open up your own beliefs?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And in fact, there've been a few things that, we hear about. We have these stereotypes about with other religions, or we have certain ideas about what makes something positive or negative in religious ritual or belief. So I'll just give one example. There's some sub-Saharan African death traditions that to a lot of people in Western society might seem um, you know, limiting or cruel or damaging or something. And just, for example, elder people would often wander off into the forest to die. They would think, it's my time to die. I'm going to go and lie down and die. And then the hyenas or jackals are going to come and eat my bones, basically. And a missionary or an anthropologist would stroll by and say, wait a minute, we have the medicine to save you. We can help you out. And they would say, no, it's my time to go. And they'd go back to the village and say, look, your grandmother's in there in the woods and she can be saved. And they would say, no, it's up to her. So that wouldn't happen in our society. That person would be
Mm.
committed. They'd be, forced to be on a drip and life support and whatever. So that kind of thing, I think,
Yeah.
opening up to these ideas that might initially seem like, you'd balk at them because they seem cruel, but really it's just the way the culture has learned to deal with death in a way that's actually healthy for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to open up and understand. I know I get questioned a lot of times about the practices, and even like with psychedelics coming in to help us at end of life. Is that allowed? Is it not? And so I think we need to open up and expand and look to different cultures, because I don't think there is just one way. I really don't. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for your work for sure.
Thank you.
I think it's really important. And I think it can help us, like you were saying too, understand more about diversity and understand that our soul has had many journeys. Like, let's stand in somebody else's shoes every once in a while, because maybe we've been in them.
Right.
Right? Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, where can we find your book, your work? Do you teach? Do you lecture? Where can we find more about you?
I guess first port of call is my website, gregoryshushan.com. The book should be available pretty much anywhere that you buy books. The new one is out soon. And yeah, I'm also on all the social media pretty much. So, and it's
Okay.
under my full name.
Great. Yeah. And
And
a shout
yeah,
out to Inner Traditions for the publishing of the book. And I will be sure to put all the links in the show notes for sure for you. Yeah.
great.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
do like to come back, and I know we've kind of said it, but just to give our listeners a little uplifting message to leave them on, how would you say that working with this near death experience in ancient civilizations can help to empower the spirit, the soul right now in our lives?
I think it can show people that there's something beyond the present reality. And whatever the nature of that is, it's something that we're going to transcend the present and go into this obviously very different heightened state of consciousness and awareness in the future. And that it's, potentially accessible in this life in healthier ways.
Yeah, I agree. We can expand our consciousness. We can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your work and for joining us today. I'm very grateful for the conversation. Yeah.
You're welcome.
To
Thank
your
you very
spirit.
much. Thanks, you too.
Thank you. So, yes, we can expand our consciousness, open up to these concepts to help us on our soul's journey. There is something beyond this present reality. And whether you know it or not, or whatever the nature of that is for you, it is possible to transcend the present. And through this heightened state of consciousness and awareness, open up to your soul's journey. It can help you to understand more about your path and how you live your life. The journey of our soul has so much to teach us. I know for me, it has helped me to understand circumstances that I didn't understand, that I didn't know. But it has helped me to be stronger, more powerful in the work that I offer. It can allow for new growth. Want to know more about your own soul's journey? Schedule a complimentary spiritual upgrade call with me and let's talk about it. Let's see how we can find those tools and techniques to help you move through all the transitions we are all going through. Now is the time. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check out Gregory's work. It is quite fascinating to read some of these stories. I am your host, Terry Ann Hyman. To your spirit, namaste.